In 215 BCE, Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China, launched a preemptive strike against a century-old enemy. He ordered his trusted general, Meng Tian, to lead an invasion to take the Ordos Loop region in Inner Mongolia. The enemies who held the territory were the fearsome Xiongnu. The Xiongnu were nomads primarily based in what is now modern-day Mongolia. For centuries, the Chinese and the Xiongnu had fought each other for land. By the time China was unified by the first emperor under the Qin dynasty, the Xiongnu had evolved into a powerful, expansionist force, threatening the Qin dynasty itself. This video will summarize the wars fought between the Chinese and the Xiongnu, but look more deeply into the theory that a small contingent of Romans was present in one of the battles, fighting against the Chinese. General Meng Tian's objectives were clear. He is to move into the Ordos Loop with 100,000 soldiers and forcefully evict the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu were led by a man named Tuman. His title was Xiongnu, equivalent to supreme leader. After a 416-kilometer trek, the footman-oriented Qin army came into contact with the Xiongnu warriors, who fought primarily on horseback. The result of the invasion was a great victory for the Qin and a catastrophic defeat for the Xiongnu. Tuman Xiongnu fled north into Mongolia, where he hid for a decade, and groomed his warrior son, Madu Xiongnu. In just a few years after the defeat by the Qin, Madu Xiongnu united his people and organized the various Xiongnu tribes into a confederation. The Xiongnu were no longer splintered groups of nomads, but a united, sedentary nation, an empire stretching from the Liao River in the east to Kazakhstan in the west, and from Lake Baikal in Russia in the north, right down to the doorsteps of the Qin Empire. It was not long until the Xiongnu started raiding its southern neighbor again. The Qin Empire suffered from political corruption and withered away after a devastating revolt, which gave rise to the Han dynasty. The transition from Qin to Han forced the Chinese to focus on stabilizing their interior. This gave the Xiongnu opportunities to expand, taking over Chinese territories north of the Great Wall and leading raids and incursions further south into China. The first emperor of the Han dynasty, Emperor Gaozu, sought a military answer against the Xiongnu raids like his Qin predecessors. Unfortunately for him, the Xiongnu had become much stronger. If ancient sources are to be taken at face value, Madu Xiongnu and his 40,000 riders lured Gaozu's army of up to 300,000 to Mount Baidan, near modern-day Beijing. He then ordered the rest of his army of 300,000 elite cavalries to emerge from hiding to trap the Chinese. After a 7-day battle, the siege on the trapped Chinese army was lifted by bribery. After this battle, the Han dynasty switched to a peaceful answer to the Xiongnu problem and was subjected to Heqin, or marriage alliance. To guarantee safety, the Han dynasty must marry off princesses to the Xiongnu leaders and provide the Xiongnu with a periodical tributes of silk, rice, and liquor. This pact, where the Xiongnu were the wolves and the Chinese the sheep, would continue for 6 decades. As the Han dynasty stabilized and accumulated large national treasury surpluses, the Xiongnu would continue their raids, while the marriage alliances were still in effect. The Xiongnu had much to gain from this tribute system, while the Chinese were humiliated and burdened with these expenses. The marriage alliance system turned out to be simple extortion, as the Xiongnu not only raided the Chinese, but invaded with armies, penetrating as far south as the doorsteps of Xi'an, the capital of the Han dynasty. All that would change when the 7th emperor of the Han dynasty, Emperor Wu, decided enough was enough. He called for an assembly at court, where the pro-war factions eventually won out. In 133 BCE, 67 years after the great defeat at Mount Baidan, Han Dynasty China declared war on the Xiongnu. This war lasted on and off for around 2 centuries and saw pitched battles and raids of epic scale and proportion, involving hundreds of thousands of infantry and dragoons, trekking across endless deserts and sand. Armies would attempt to outmaneuver each other in the immense Eurasian landmass. Mass cavalry armies would engage mobile fortresses made up of chariot formations. Han crossbowmen and Xiongnu archers would trade bolts and arrows, and infantry would crash into each other with shields. There were prolonged campaigns in the war that nearly bankrupted the Han treasury and devastated the Xiongnu population and livestock. The armies would not only fight in China and Mongolia, but in Siberia and Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan. The Han and Xiongnu Empire were not the only combatants in the war. Several Central Asian and Indo-European civilizations were involved, including the Lowland Kingdom, Dingling, Wusun, literally descendants of the Crow, Fergana, and Sogdiana. Even the Scythians and Bactrians were indirectly involved. The Xiongnu would attack the Yuezi, the people who displaced the Scythians. Some of these civilizations were enslaved by the Xiongnu and rose up in rebellion, seeking Han assistance or submitting to them, as the war turned terribly for the Xiongnu. In 71 BCE, the Xiongnu were pummeled from multiple fronts by Han and allied armies, and their empire was beginning to crack. The Xiongnu sued for peace multiple times, but the Han courts would only accept peace under one condition. The Xiongnu must submit to China and pay tribute as a tributary state, not as an equal nation. The Xiongnu closer to the Han submitted, but their compatriots in the north continued to resist. Even with peace, the Xiongnu bought little respite as a civil war broke out in 57 BCE due to succession disagreements. Zizi and Hu Hanye fought each other for the title of Xiongnu. Zizi won out and had driven Hu Hanye out of Xiongnu lands in 56 BCE. The two brothers went their separate ways. Hu Hanye would pledge allegiance to the Han Empire, while Zizi, growing weaker and weaker, decided to migrate westwards to reconstruct the once glorious Xiongnu Empire. Zizi migrated to the west and settled a city near what the Chinese called Xiyu, or western regions in modern-day Central Asia. Zizi Xiongnu then started extorting tribute from local states. The Chinese also had a presence in the region, and some of the states forced in the tributes were either allies of the Chinese or were under their protection. Naturally, the foundation of a new Xiongnu state in this area and expansionism worried the Chinese. The relation was exacerbated by the fact that Zizi later executed a Chinese envoy. The governor of the western regions did not want a new war, but the general in charge, Chen Tang, perceived the rise of Zizi and his new city to be a threat, just like old times. He wanted to quickly root out this threat. Through forgery and without orders or permission from the capital, Chen Tang led an expedition against Zizi. The governor followed him reluctantly. October 36 BCE, Chen Tang's army arrived at the doorsteps of Zizi's capital, located near Taraz in modern-day Kazakhstan. Zizi's capital is known as Zizi City, and is described as a fortress near the Talas River, with a layer of palisade, a citadel, and a palace. The city was defended by 3,000 Xiongnu warriors. Outside the city were 10,000 Kanju cavalrymen. On the other side, Chen Tang led 40,000 troops, an army made up of warriors from 15 allied states in the Tarim Basin, and Han-Chinese cavalry and crossbowmen. The Xiongnu and their Kanju allies were outnumbered 3-1. Chen Tang put his army to camp 1.5 kilometers away from the city and surrounded Zizi. He gathered his army and told them, "Let's get down to business to defeat the Huns." Okay, I made that part up. A Xiongnu sally of horsemen from the city was quickly repelled. The Han then assaulted the outer walls. Zizi Xiongnu was in a desperate situation, fighting alongside his queen and concubines. The Chinese showered the city with crossbows. which likely outranged and overpowered the bows used by the Xiongnu. Zizi himself was hit by a bolt whilst shooting from the ramparts. The Kanju cavalrymen outside the city then attacked the besiegers but were unable to turn the tide. The defenders gave up more and more ground as they were pushed into the citadel before retreating into Zizi Xianyu's palace, where the final melee brought the supreme leader and his bodyguards to their deaths. This is one of the minor battles between the Han and Xiongnu empires. What is really interesting are two hypotheses regarding a special units of infantry during the siege. According to the Book of Han, the primary source of the battle, Chen Tang's soldiers encountered a unit of around 100 infantrymen defending Zizi's palisade, positioned on the two sides of the gate. These infantrymen are described as being disciplined and in a fish-scaled formation of overlapping shields. This is strange because this kind of tactic was never used by the barbarian warriors the Han army fought. The Xiongnu went into battle on horseback, and infantries did not fight in the kind of orderly formations as their Chinese counterparts. Instead, they charged in clumped masses. So a formation of disciplined infantrymen overlapping their shields would have not been of Xiongnu or local non-Chinese origin. There are two theories as to who these mystery infantrymen were. Number 1. Homer H. Dubs, an American historian who translated parts of the Book of Han, and author of a plethora of publications on Chinese history, posits that the mystery infantrymen in question are actually Romans. They were remnants of the 7 legions led into battle against the Parthians at the Battle of Carrhae by Marcus Licinius Crassus. We know that around 10,000 Romans were captured by the Parthians after the battle. According to Dubs, a contingent was forced-marched to the easternmost boundaries of the Parthian Empire at Margiana to guard the frontiers. As Zizi grew in power and renown, he was able to gain a contingent of these Roman legionaries as mercenaries. How likely is this theory? It is possible. Margiana, where the Romans were ordered to guard, is 800 kilometers from Zizi city. This is roughly half the distance the Han army had to trek to lay siege to Zizi. So the Romans definitely could have made it to Zizi Xianyu's land. The Battle of Carrhae took place in May 53 BCE, while the Battle of Zizi took place in 36 BCE, a 17 years difference. The legionaries who fought the Parthians would have still been able to take up arms. The Romans were taken at Carrhae, force-marched to Margiana, and then a contingent made it to Zizi city under Zizi's lordship. Dubs asserts that only the Romans, specifically remnants of the Roman legions, could have fought in such a disciplined formation on the Xiongnu side of the battle. He also states that the fish-scaled formation is actually the Roman testudo. Just as they have applied this tactic to shield against Parthian arrow storms at Carrhae, the remnant legionaries did the same against Chinese boat storms at Zizi city. The Chinese did not kill off the infantry force, as they retreated back into the city after being ridden down by cavalry and showered by crossbowmen. Dubs asserts that these legionaries would eventually settle in central China in a county called Lijian, supposedly named after the Roman word legio, or legion in modern English. Lijian is a special county due to the fact that locals have distinct non-Chinese features. Dubs states that the people of Lijian, who have Caucasian facial features such as green eyes, blonde hair, and Roman noses, are descendants of the Roman legionaries who fought at Carrhae and Zizi. Critics of Dubs' theory suggest that he jumped to the conclusion without hard evidence. While Roman legionaries enslaved by Parthia fighting the Chinese in present-day Kazakhstan is a possibility, there is no solid evidence to prove this. Theory number 2 is advanced by Christopher Anthony Matthew in the Journal of Asian History by a German academic publishing house called I'm not going to bother pronouncing that. Matthew challenges Dub's speculation that the mystery infantrymen were Roman legionaries, because legionaries did not overlap their scuta while in the testudo formation. Instead, they held their scuta side by side, in front or above their heads, to maximize coverage against projectiles. Furthermore, the testudo was an anti-projectile tactic. Yet when the Chinese rained the mystery infantrymen with bolts, they quickly withdrew to the safety of the walls. This would indicate that the subjects in question did not form an anti-projectile formation like the testudo. So who else could have interlocked their shields in a fish-scale formation? Who were the mystery infantrymen? We should note that the shields must have been large enough to rationalize using them in such a manner, so small shields would not count as they wouldn't be able to overlap. Matthew asserts that the only possible explanation is that the men might have been descendants of Alexander the Great's army that had retained the classical Greek style of warfare. During Alexander's campaigns, he garrisoned troops in the east. Matthew states that these garrisons passed down their weapons, shields, and method of warfare in the east. They were not Macedonian phalangites, as they did not have shields large enough to be overlapped, nor did they ever overlap their shields, as both arms are required to carry the sarissa. Matthew thinks that the shields must have been the larger aspis. This means that the infantrymen are descendants of Greek hoplites, and their formation is the classical Greek phalanx formation. Once the men ready their spear and shields and face towards the enemy, their formation would then resemble the fish-scaled formation. How likely is this theory? We know that Alexander founded many cities and settled in conquered territories in the east as far as Bactria, whom the Chinese also had contact with. What's more interesting is that the Chinese had fought tribes and civilizations the Seleucids also fought against, so there was plenty of room for cross-cultural exchanges. Matthew states that the men Alexander garrisoned in the region passed down the Greek method of warfare, and that the phalanx survived in Central Asia, with certain civilizations retaining a Greco-Macedonian way of life. Remember the county of Lijian discussed in Dub's theory? We examined the assertion that the word Lijian is a transliteration of the word legio. Interestingly, Dubs asserts that Lijian is also the transliteration for Alexandria. Were the mystery infantrymen really Roman legionaries? Or were they descendants of Alexander's garrisons in the eastern parts of his once great empire? Until hard evidence comes up, we may only speculate.